Thank you very much for that. Just to tell you a little bit about Higginson Strategy. We're an award-winning communications agency that supports organisations changing the world for the better. We have a dedicated women's practice. We have a practice looking at the environment, and we have and we work with a number of different NGOs, charities, organisations. There are two things that we've identified before creating Expert Bureau. One, there's been an increased interest in experts over the last 12, 13 weeks that we've been in lockdown. We have carried out our own polling, populous polling, 2 weeks ago, which answered what we already thought, which was the number of that Britons are more likely now to listen to expert advice across a whole range of different areas. It's not just health that we're looking for them in. It's in the environment, it's in education, it's in lots of different areas. We've found that for young people, that's increased even higher. And some of my panelists might say, I didn't need to do the research to find this out, but women are more likely to listen to experts than men. The other fundamental difference, so in that we want to hear more from experts at the moment, and the strange situation that we're in now is forcing us all over. And so that clip that we saw at the start of that video, Michael Gove, I'm sure you all remember him saying it. It was, if you're in the UK anyway, was a key part of his Brexit message for leaving the EU, in that we'd all had enough of experts. The second interesting part of what we've seen is an acceleration in newspaper decline. In the last few weeks alone, there's been a decline of 30% of newspaper sales. Now, I used to be a journalist for 20 years myself. Newspapers have never ever managed to find a way of filling out the loss of print advertising. Digital advertising doesn't pay as much. And they've never managed to do that. The FT and I were down by almost 40% in a week. So all I can say, I don't have any shares in any newspapers, but I'd say at the weekend when you manage to get out, go and buy a newspaper. It's one of the best things you can possibly do. I love reading a newspaper, and the amount of time we're spending now looking at screens and stuff is such a great thing to do. But what that has meant, and if you look at this story here on the right, this story I've just pulled up this morning, it's not an old story, news, radio, everything else. And newspaper, but the problem with that is the jobs that are being cut are the most senior and experienced journalists, because those are the most expensive journalists. Now, as a journalist, you build up contacts over time. Another point of lockdown is you cannot be going out and meeting those journalists. So what we're finding is a lot of the same experts are popping up over and over again, because as a journalist, most journalists are generalists. I spent most of my career as a generalist journalist, only moving into being a specialist in politics in the last 7 years of my career in journalism. And as a generalist, you don't always have the experts at hand on those phone numbers for the different stories that you're asked to do. So you might be asked to quickly, by your news desk, pick up a story on the crisis in getting PPE for care services. And what do? You instantly go onto Google, you find out who's an expert on this, and you'll usually find an expert that's been quoted in some other newspaper. And so you get the same experts being kind of bandied around the place all the time. And so that's where the idea of Expert Bureau has come about. It's about providing a resource for journalists and for experts. The other, for journalists, it means it's a place that they can go and find somewhere, and we've got experts in a number of different areas: business and finance, environment, education, health and equality. And in those areas, a journalist can come along and say, can you give me an expert in this area to answer, give us a quote on this story, or provide some more detailed knowledge. For the experts itself, it means that we are monitoring the news 24 hours for them, including embargoed stories that they don't have access to. So we work to amplify the voices of the Experts Bureau, and that's my short explanation on what Expert Bureau is all about. I'd like to now introduce you to our panelists. That's the reason you've joined us today. Firstly, Sian Sutherland is someone that I've had the great pleasure of working with for 3 years now as the co-founder of A Plastic Planet. A Plastic Planet has grown, as many hopefully watching here today know well, into one of the most well-known campaign groups against plastic. Sian is a female marketeer of the year, serial entrepreneur, former Michelin-starred restaurant owner, just to name a few of those things. And we're very pleased and happy to have you on today, Sian. Lucy Siegle is the chair of the Real Circularity Coalition. She's a well-known journalist and author. She writes a column for The Observer, and since January of this year has been the chair of the Real Circularity Coalition. I've had the pleasure of working with her on that campaign to really grow the circular economy and getting the whole world talking about and thinking about the circular economy. Sorry, I'm moving around my screen of people as I'm doing this, sorry. Rosamund Kissi-Debrah, I've had the pleasure of working with she is the World Health Organization Health and Air Pollution Advocate. Last year we worked on some campaigning that was instrumental in seeing the announcement of legally binding targets to stop air pollution in the Queen's speech. She's the chair and executive of the Ella Roberta Family Foundation, and she's also a public health consultant specializing in asthma education and exposure to air pollution on health. Juliet Gellatley is the founder of Viva, a vegan charity. Before that, she was one of the first ever vegetarian lobbyists in the UK, so they had decades of experience in this area, and we've been very proud to work with Viva on the close proximity between diet and health and the benefits that a vegan diet can have on the environment. And finally, Bella Lack, youth patron of Born Free. She's a brilliant environmental campaigner. If you don't follow Bella on Twitter, please do. It's just her eye for the beauty of nature is second to none. She's been a great activist in the youth-led movement This Is 0 Hour, and I'd like to just say welcome to all 5 panelists today. I'm going to put us back to the start of our question, which is how can we secure a green recovery? And I'm putting that question, and I'll give all of our panelists time to answer those questions. If I can first do just some housekeeping for the audience there, just to let you all know in the audience, we cannot see you or hear you, your screen isn't on, so if your kids are jumping on top of you, do not worry. If they're trying to talk to you, we cannot see you. What I'd ask for you to do, we would love this to be interactive though, so can you please put any questions in the Q&A box, and I will look out for those and try to come to those questions there, and I will put those to members of the audience. If you can please put your name and your organization in as well. We've got 50 or 60 people in the audience there, so put your name and organization so that I can say where you're from and where that question is coming from, and I will direct that to our panelists. So first off, Sian, how can we secure a green recovery?
Thanks, John. Already messing me around by changing the order that you told me. So good morning, everybody. So how can we secure a green recovery? Well, I like to make things for myself as super simple as possible. So I'd like to look at who are the protagonists, who are the people that can actually make change happen here, and I put them into 3 buckets. So who are the ones that can actually demand and drive change? So the first bucket, of course, is the government. And yes, we need much stricter legislation. We need real EPR, extended producer responsibility. We need proper control over pollution. We need investment in our renewables and green tech, hydrogen, all the new green power that we are seeing. We need to make sure that people cannot hide behind what I believe a lot of the time is simply marketing schemes. And I think a lot of the carbon credit schemes you can put into that bucket. So that's what the government needs to do. And I think there's a lot of great examples that we can follow right now. And it's very interesting to see the investment that the German government are making. For me, the most fascinating thing is what they're doing in Amsterdam, where they are adopting the donut economic model to rebuild their economy through Amsterdam. And for us to have a sophisticated, huge conurbation like Amsterdam, taking this new economic model that really focuses on equality and how everybody, including everything that lives on the planet, can thrive, versus targeting unsustainable growth in GDP as the only metric of success. So that's the first bucket of who can be the change makers there. But we all know governments are slow, they're unwieldy, they think in very short-term 4-year chunks of time. So how much are we really going to see happen in this little moment in time that we have where we can make seismic change happen? How much leadership will we see from the government? I don't know. Then the other massive bucket is, of course, the public. And we've all seen those surveys saying that only 91% of the UK want to go back to how we lived 3 months ago. So what can they do as individuals to ensure that they don't slide back into those old habits? And for me, the key to everything, because I think there is a lot of power in the personal, but actually there's a lot of disempowerment as well as individuals, particularly if we are simply given old ways to live by government and industry. And I think the key to everything here has got to be education. And there's a massive amount of conversations right now about schools. I was really thinking, isn't it extraordinary that kids today learn more about computer programming than they do about the wonders of nature and our role and responsibility within nature? And wouldn't it be extraordinary, so I'm sure Bella's going to have a lot to say about this, if education actually stepped into a void so that people grow up knowing a different way, living and breathing a different way, understanding our role in the whole of the natural infrastructure. And the final bucket, and the one that actually makes me most excited as an entrepreneur, is of course business. And this is where I see that we could make rapid change. And of course, business is influenced by the other two buckets. Everybody in business wants to do what the public is demanding, and everyone in business is ultimately driven to change by legislation and taxation, making things a have to do rather than a nice to do. So we need examples, and this is where I think that business can really step into a great leadership role now of creating new models, new metrics of success, having the bravery, we need leaders who have the bravery to step out of the old framework of simply rewarding shareholder value and look at new metrics and tackle things in a fresh new way. And it's only by showing by example, and this is where we need strong business leaders, that we're actually going to see change happen fast. So to wrap, I think we had this extraordinary moment, but it is only a moment in time where people are looking for change, where we are coming out of a pandemic, and where there is disaster, there is always opportunity for tremendous change. But it's a very small window. And if we don't do it now, and this is where I'm hoping business will step up and demonstrate it can happen, then in 6 months' time, I think that moment will be gone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sian. Lucy, I'm going to bring you in. Same question, please.
Thank you. Wow, thanks for that, Sian. You're so concise. It's amazing. I'm not going to be as concise, but there you go. I think the first point that I'd really like to make is I'd like to paraphrase Christiana Figueres. When she has said, and I know because she said it to me personally when I interviewed her for our podcast, So Hot Right Now, and she talked about the shrinking of time. So we were talking before coronavirus hit about 10 years, this 10-year window. I don't mean we as in just us here. Everyone was talking in those terms. And if you look at what is happening with recovery packages, billion-dollar recovery packages through industrialized nations, where they put that money is very, very significant, because it basically determines what happens on climate targets, on climate breakdown. And the way Christiana views it is the 10 years has now shrunk to 18 months, and there is a window that decides our fate. If those billions of dollars go into fossil fuels and business as usual and normal life, as we may call it, to paraphrase, well, not actually to quote directly from Christiana, we are screwed. So there is the stark reality. So the green recovery is not a nice to have. It's not a sort of theoretical idea floating about, which we can kind of kick around for a bit. It is absolutely necessary. It is a matter of life and death. Now, I mentioned our podcast shamelessly, but we are all about communication. And what we do is unwrap communication, and we talk about how nature and climate comms has often failed in the past, but also we're really interested in examples of where it's doing really, really well. And I think communication of a green recovery, what it is, how it can happen, what it will look like, and how it is inclusive are the things that will determine whether or not it happens. And I'd just like to talk about a couple of those points very quickly. So Sian talked about the general public, and our mandate for a green recovery needs to come from us. Normal people getting on with their lives need to be invested in a green recovery. And one of the things that we've seen again and again and again is that people, if we're at a crossroads, we can take one way or we can take another. If people don't know what the hopeful future looks like, they don't know to ask for it and demand it. And one of the problems that we have had throughout trying to articulate nature and climate is that we don't have enough examples of a positive future. And I don't want to sound all sort of happy clappy about this, but we have to get better at balancing and telling more stories about what this looks like. We also have to be cognizant, I think, that there are a whole host of enemies. We're starting to see it last night. There was some piece in the Telegraph, calm down, Greta. We don't need what you're saying right now. We need to focus on the economy. Is the economy stupid? All of this very destabilizing rhetoric. We know who funds it. We know what it's about. We know it's the vested interests of fossil fuels. We know how dirty that gets. We know that fight is happening, and we have to square up to it, and we have to address it head on. We also have to understand that the architecture, and I'm talking about our national architecture in our own government, is not fit for purpose. It will not deliver a green recovery. There are so many barriers and so much vested interest in fossil fuel built into that architecture that we need to be ready for a serious unraveling. The good news, and this is going to sound very, very strange, because I think a lot of this comes back to consumerism, and I think that, I'm not sure, this is not a very original thought, but the population, the general public, we are deadened in our desire for this stuff because we are told it is our duty, and this historically has happened. Every time there has been a time of economic strife, we have been told it is our duty to consume, to build back. And we have to sever that link. That's what we absolutely have to do. Now, I was speaking to Walter Starhill, who is the sort of godfather, not godfather, it sounds a bit mafioso, grandfather of the circular economy model yesterday. And he's made an amazing point. It was amazing to me. He said that the linear economy, throwing products out there without any regard of, what's going to happen to them, whether they become pollution, end of life, all of that stuff, the way that we pollute through products and services. The linear economy thinks it's doing a good job because we all buy it without question. And we have had 3 months of lockdown where we have not been buying without question because we've stopped consuming in the main. Some people are getting a lot of parcels from Amazon, but we've broken that connection. We bought ourselves a little bit of cognitive space. We bought ourselves a little bit of mindful space, and that's really, really powerful. So I really want to focus my attention doing some work there. I don't want citizens to feel that they have to become consumers, because that is so linked to the normalization of a completely dystopian and dysfunctional economy that we cannot afford to go back there. So that's where I am right now.
Great, thank you, Lucy. So there was, let's not be happy clappy about it, but we can't rely on government there from Lucy, and it's not just being about consumers, but we need to grab the power in our own hands. Juliet, can I bring you in now with your views?
Hello, everybody. Let's go back to what's triggered all this pandemic itself. So when Viva started researching pandemics, it became clear that epidemics and pandemics, the vast majority of them, are caused by the way that we exploit animals on this planet. So almost every pandemic, an outbreak of infectious disease, is either caused by factory farming and the outbreak of new viruses, or viruses that already exist becoming more virulent, or by the trade in wildlife, of course. So this attitude that animals are there for us to do with what we so like, to abuse them and exploit them, is coming home to roost. And it impacts on just about every issue that we're talking about today. So this year, we're liable to kill about 70 billion land animals on this planet and trillions of water animals. Now, the oceans are collapsing. The ecology of the oceans are collapsing. The ecologies of all the ecosystems on our planet are collapsing. One of the main drivers of that, if not the main driver, is the consumption of animals, and it is wholly unsustainable. So we're going towards a human population of reaching probably around 10 billion by about 2050. Scientists are pretty unanimous in stating that it's wholly unsustainable to be able to feed us on a meat and dairy based diet the way that we are consuming today. And the reason that they're saying it's wholly unsustainable is because the vast majority of calories when you consume meat and dairy, it's using about 4/5 of the world's land to produce this meat and dairy, but only provides less than 1/5 of the calories. So it's completely unsustainable. So any talk about any kind of green future that the human race can survive has to involve encouraging everybody to become vegan. And we have to take that serious. It is not a peripheral issue. It's absolutely central to saving this planet. So in terms of looking at it from the environmental point of view, Joseph Poor's paper from Oxford University, which is one of the most well-respected papers, which pretty much every scientist in the sphere agrees with, has said that if the world goes vegan, we reduce land use by 76% for agricultural output. That means stopping destroying the Amazon forests. It means stop destroying our own forest across the EU, etc., etc. It means much reduced water pollution, because animal agriculture is the biggest cause of water pollution on the planet. It means halving global warming gases from agricultural output, which is producing about 1/4 of all global warming gases. But crucially, it means being able to rewild. And to be honest, the only way that we're actually going to be able to save this planet and not continue heading right into this 6th mass extinction is through rewilding, massive rewilding programs. So how do you get to the point when we get people to take this seriously? Well, obviously through campaigning, which we've been doing vigorously. I can say sometimes it feels very slow, the change, but if you look in my career time, from when I started campaigning on vegetarianism, then set up Viva, there's been absolute transformation in the UK in terms of attitudes to veganism and its availability. So yes, as other speakers have said, first and foremost, we need governmental change, because we need to end factory farming literally before it ends us. We need intergovernmental change in terms of stopping wildlife exploitation and the exploitation of their habitats. But perhaps most of all, we need to change ourselves, because one of the most powerful things you can do is to go vegan yourself. And we have to accept that is something incredibly positive that we all have the power within our hands to do without, God forbid, lobbying people like Boris Johnson. We can do this ourselves, and it's us that drives that change, that drives the businesses, supply and demand and all the rest of it. The biggest two industries on the entire planet are meat and animal agriculture, and the pharmaceutical, the drug industries, because the drug industry mainly supplies factory farming more than it does human beings. So the two things are very interlinked. So to drive that change in those businesses, we as individuals need to change as well. But as I said, the positive side to all that is that we do have that power, and we literally, every time we go into a supermarket or restaurant, have the power over what we buy. And perhaps more than almost anything else that we can do, what we eat can cause substantial drivers to ensure that government and businesses take our demand to save this planet seriously. My final point is what the other speakers have alluded to, that it's now or never really. I do think this is our last chance. And I think that this pandemic coronavirus, I think we were really lucky to get away with the low mortality rates. I'm not being glib at all about the people that have died and suffered. I'm saying the mortality rates are incredibly low. And when you look at similar diseases and what could have happened with bird flu, like H5N1 with a 60% mortality rate, pandemics will happen more frequently and they will be more deadly in future unless we do something now.
Thank you, Juliet. And so some really interesting facts there. And I don't think everyone would have known about that very close link between pharma and meat and dairy and the amount of pharmaceutical drugs that those animals have to be given. And lots of us know a bit more about the amount of land use. I'll bring Ros in now, if I can, please. You're on mute, Ros. Stephen, if we just take Ros mute. There.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. There is already a pandemic going on that I would like to give a slightly different slant that no one sort of mentioned. So as we sit here now, this year, again, 7 million people are going to die from air pollution. So, and it's very interesting looking at recent research from Harvard, the relationship between the virus and air pollution. And it sort of saddened me deeply last week when it was announced that 40,000 people have died in the UK from the virus, because that is the actual number of people that die every year in this country from air pollution. And it's something I've been following, obviously, very closely in the last 6 years. And I think one of the reasons why more people haven't come on board the discussion is because it is invisible and no one really talks about people dying. So for example, we all know, or people in health know, that if there's a spike in air pollution, then more people are likely to have asthma attacks or heart attacks. But what tends to happen is, if someone dies from a heart attack, they don't put the role air pollution has had. They will put on their death certificate an actual heart attack. And that is one of the reasons why I believe more people need to be educated about the impacts of air pollution on people's health. Also, it's very interesting that the people that are affected the most, they actually don't have a voice. If you look around, who is actually talking about these things? And I think we should educate people that they have more power than they actually think. One only needs to look around in the past fortnight with all the marches, and it shows you what people power can actually do. And I would have it that it needs to be everyone. I'm not really about saying it needs to be that group or that one, because I believe jointly we are all more powerful. Governments, by the way, don't like to be unpopular. So, and I also slightly disagree the whole issue about young people. Young people understand exactly what is going on, and up until they had to stop marching, they have been marching every Friday all over the world. It's just that they don't have a vote, so governments don't feel they actually need to listen to them. So going forward, I think we need to carry on with the energy the likes of Greta have inspired, and we need to force governments to actually do something about it. And the governments are going to try and put the economy first, and the economy is extremely important. Let's face it, we all need to eat, we all need to work, but unless you have your health, you don't have anything. So we can't forget about the air that we actually breathe. And that's what I would like to add to the conversation.
Thank you, Ros. I think that's a very important point. In terms of the number of deaths, there are 40,000 deaths in the UK from air pollution, but we hear very little about it. I've been writing about air pollution in London for 10 years, and got a fraction of the amount of attention as Ros points out, because it's an invisible killer. So all of us have become absolutely obsessed with COVID and COVID deaths now. Right, so, but how can we turn that to our fear of something that's killing us potentially at a slower rate and isn't as obvious? Ros mentioned young people there, and I'm going to bring us nicely to our final panelist, Bella. Bella, can we have your view, please, on the how do we get a green recovery?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think it's interesting, even just in our dialogue today, we've spoken about the economy and the environment in a sort of dichotomy, as though we can have one without the other. But, you know, if it was in a Venn diagram, the economy would be just a tiny dot within the environment, because the natural world really underpins everything we do. It provides $125 trillion natural services. So I think it's really important that we remember that when we're speaking about it. And also, this year was meant to be a huge year. It was called a super year for nature, for biodiversity. We were meant to have several UN conferences. There was meant to be a conference in October where we implemented the post-2020 nature framework. So that's another reason why now more than ever we should be thinking about biodiversity protection. And as has been mentioned previously, you know, the pandemic comes from our destruction of the natural world. And if we don't think about that, if we don't act upon that, we're going to have many more and more severe pandemics in the future, because we know that zoonotic diseases are increasing, and we know that 75% of diseases that humans are contracting now come from animals, from non-human animals. So that's sort of just a bit of background on how important biodiversity is, especially in light of the current crisis. And I think what everyone has said, you know, if we could implement all of that, that would create a much, much better world for all of us. So circular economy being one of the most important things, as Sean said, as Amsterdam are doing with the donut model, because it's crazy to believe that we can continue having this infinite growth on a finite planet. And when we speak about recovery, it's sort of a process. And I think we're a bit on the way, we're a bit on that process already, because in the past few months, lots of people now are thinking about their consumption, and we're realizing that how we lived before, what we defined as normal, really wasn't sustainable, and we couldn't continue like that. So I think if we, in the UK, if we replicate this donut model, which Amsterdam are doing, we also need to think about, as has also been mentioned, we need to think about rewilding. We need to think about restoring ecosystems on a huge scale. And I would say, at the very least, we need to protect 30% of the most biodiverse places on Earth by 2030. That's a UN goal, which was meant to be focused on in October, which now won't happen. So we need to continue campaigning for that. And lastly, something which hasn't been specifically mentioned is wildlife crime, because we know that wildlife crime was another root of this pandemic, and it's a huge cause of biodiversity loss. And we need to have a legal framework so that these criminals cannot continue to act with impunity. And there are, for all of these 3 points I mentioned, there are two things: there's governmental systemic change, and then there's individual change. And as individuals, we can partake in both of those through campaigning, through really pushing for that change, even when this is over. Because I think humans have a tendency to sort of move on very quickly. And we've already forgotten how excited and thrilled we all were in, I don't know, in March when we saw, for example, dolphins in Venice or pigs in Paris. You know, we were all so thrilled to see that. And now the mindset has changed a lot because we've moved on, we've realized the severity of what's happening. And we need to make sure that we don't move on as quickly from the root cause of this crisis, that we continue to push for change, especially systemic change, when this is all over.
Thank you. So some really great messages there about some of the natural things that we've all experienced on lockdown, or we should have done, being able to hear birds singing and seeing birds come back to places that had been taken over by people. The goal that we should protect 30% of the most biodiverse spaces on Earth, and that there should be a legal framework to wildlife crime. I'm going to take some of the questions from the audience. Thank you for these questions coming in. On the last point there, that I know that lots of the members of the audience would have worked to that super year for nature over the last 24 months or even more, and lots of us have been working towards this being a super year. So I think that's a really good point, Bella, in that let's carry on making this a super year. We shouldn't be pushing back nature and the environment to grow the economy. So a question from Peter Hall, the director of the International Rhino Foundation. Peter asks, should the United Kingdom bring forward the target date for net zero carbon from 2050 to 2027? And he points out that we now have the technology, and that the long-term bond costs are extremely low now due to some of the fiscal measures that have been taking place around the world. Is there anyone that wants to tackle this one from our panelists?
Just jump in with a plastic perspective, because what I see at the moment, and the thing that frustrates me more than anything else, is the amount of pacts and pledges and promises and basically marketing bullshit that you see coming out of so many big businesses. And I absolutely agree that we can make change happen faster. And just in our world of trying to engage with business and have a dramatic reduction in plastic use, because I believe plastic is actually the gateway to so much else. Because yes, when we talk about hyperconsumption, you know, where has the planet gone wrong? The dependence on fossil fuels and this incredible hyperconsumption. Plastic has been an enabler of that. So if we can fix that, I believe that will be the gateway to fixing a lot of other things. And there are solutions for plastic. We do not need to wait 5 years to have a 10% reduction in plastic, when actually the ramp up, the increase in plastic production right now is phenomenal. You know, the plastic producers think Christmas has come early for them, particularly because of the pandemic. And when there are so many alternatives out there that do not have the devastating impact that plastic does on every level of our environment and our own health, surely we have to be motivated to act faster. So even if we just focused on that and accelerating change in that area, I think it can happen much, much quicker than people believe. We've got fat and lazy. Plastic is an easy default, cheap, unbelievable material, but it is also toxic and it lives forever. And there are alternatives. If we changed on that, that would, I believe, be a domino effect on so many other things.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that, or shall I move on? We've got lots of... Lucy.
Can I just come on? I think some of these targets should be brought forward dramatically. And I think that we've spent 2 months off coal. There are technologies in place, as Peter points out. So yes, we should be bringing these targets back. However, I really, really think that we need to stop siloing different targets for different things. And to Ros's point about air pollution, we just have had, so the Public Health England report that came out, there are very, very specific correlations between pollution and air quality and COVID. I know because I too have been writing a lot about air quality and air pollution, and the scientists have been working flat out during lockdown to get this data ready. When the report came out the other day on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people from ethnic minorities, pollution was not included. And all the experts said this was astonishing. I still don't know why that is the case. I haven't heard anything about it since. And I really, really think we have targets for net zero, we have targets for this, and then we just completely ignore another part of the picture. So I do want targets to be pushed forward. I do think we should be more ambitious, but I think that unless we think holistically and unless we join the dots between all different areas of the environment, we're going to continue to be in incredible trouble.
Can I just come in very, very quickly, John?
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with everything Lucy just said, and I just wanted to make the point that when I was looking at the government's panel, on the UK government's panel on climate change I'm talking about now, I was astonished at how weak their response was in terms of practicalities to reduce global warming. I mean, it almost made me want to cry. I mean, for example, in terms of stuff that scientists are saying, there's a paper in Nature that said that beef is 73 times higher compared to soya in terms of the carbon cost. And then it goes through all the other animal products, and there's a general acceptance that this is the case, and the UK government just will not take this on board at all. You know, so in terms of being able to educate people towards a greener future, we haven't got the backing, even the most basic backing and understanding of our own government. So that does worry me a lot. And that's why I keep talking about individuals changing themselves, because I have more faith in us, the public, than I do in our politicians. And so far, it seems that they're following public opinion rather than leading it. They are just not leaders in the way that they should be in terms of saving our planet. So it does make you think in terms of revolutionary terms, because in all seriousness, everybody on this panel, what hope do we really have for this government leading us in, you know, in a refined and imaginative and holistic way, so that we save our precious planet?
Great, thank you. I'm going to take another question now from Will Travers, the founder of the Born Free Foundation, that we all are an excellent organisation. Will has asked, how can we restructure our resource allocation in such a way to put investment in nature on a par with that we put on education, healthcare, and defence and education? And for instance, you know, just to add to that, why don't we have a, you know, why isn't the Environment Secretary just the Environment Secretary instead of Environment and Rural Affairs? Why is that thrown in together? Is there anyone wants to answer that? And there's a bit of an addendum to that, which is, how do we integrate a new understanding of sustainability into the fabric of our society, from Will? So, anyone want to try that financial perspective? Bella, would you like to have a go?
Well, I think we know that DEFRA are cutting funds to Natural England and to the Environment Agency hugely, and DEFRA themselves estimate that if everyone had access to green space, it would save the health system £2.1 billion a year. So there's sort of a disparity between what they're saying and what they're doing, because we know that if there's investment in green space, in rewilding, in restoration of ecosystems, then that's going to save money for our health system, for education as well. So it's really, apart from actually changing that flow of money and redistributing more towards the environmental sector, I just think that's the most important thing that they can do. And it's about recognising, maybe through individuals campaigning, through raising awareness, it's about bringing that recognition that we will save more money if we do invest in the environment.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start whizzing through the questions, I'm afraid, because I know that some people will have to get off at 12 o'clock, so we'll have to finish in 13 minutes' time. I'm going to take a question from Marta Martinez, a University of Central London student, who asks what is the role of developing countries and developed countries? And we all know that you know, developed countries have been causing more of this pollution historically, but the developing countries are potentially more polluting the way they're doing things. So does anyone want to tackle that quite difficult structural question of where responsibility lies?
To add a little bit about the responsibility of the Western big corporates, the big business, the Unilevers, the Mondeleses, the P&Gs of the world, who we know see developing countries as a massive economic opportunity for growth. And I think there is an immorality in the way that we are exploiting developing countries by simply pumping our products over there, where there is no infrastructure really for dealing with the waste that they incur. And all of us have seen the images of Tuvalu and people who are just living on mountains of waste, let alone the waste that we've exported from the UK. And the fact that there is zero responsibility for this from the big corporates. So they see that it is nothing but an economic opportunity with no responsibility. And I think that needs to be really tackled head on.
Great. I can take a question from Nathan Pearce, Sharing City, the director of Sharing Cities. He said there'll be a great pressure to go back to normal. Lots of us have been talking about nature, but really when the financial pressure comes on there, politicians across the board are going to feel the pressure to get the economy back. And how do we really frame that into the green recovery being something that's positive that they can grab hold of across the board? Lucy?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, that is the whole question.
Yeah.
The pressure is intense, and the pressure is, as I alluded to at the start of this conversation in my comments, is the pressure. Where is the pressure coming from? And that's something that we're going to have to analyze. And you know, John, you were saying about newspapers and their inherent weakness at the moment because they're on the ropes, and this is the time when we need investigative journalists most, and we need investigative journalists who know how to follow the money and follow the oil, because what we're going to do is trap ourselves, because the compulsion and the pressure to go back to normal, and a normal that is predicated on fossil fuels and factory farming and all the stuff that is connected to the destruction of the planet and the lack of valuing of nature, as Bella describes, these are all leading us on a collision course, as we know. So the next crisis is not far away, and it will be deeper, and it will be more shocking, and it will be harder to recover from. So why is it that the balance is so off that we find that hard to articulate in a way that is compelling as the go back to normal? And the go back to normal is largely framed around, if you're a member of the public, if you're a citizen, is largely framed about it's your duty to consume as you were before. Let's face it. We already know that furlough or welfare checks have been sent out in the US with kind of letters saying to that effect, your patriotic duty is to go out and buy more stuff that you don't need and you don't want and you can't afford. And this goes back to everything that everyone said. It goes back to not valuing education. It goes back to being impoverished in so many different ways. It goes back to climate justice. It goes back to the cost of this being borne on the shoulders of people who are the most marginalized. It goes back to racism. It's tied into all of these, all of the dysfunction that going back to normal encounters. So it is a very, very difficult thing to unwrap. And all I can say is, let's see if there's a very, very recent example of people protesting, standing up, coming together and pushing and having very, very uncomfortable conversations. And I think we can agree that Black Lives Matter is that example. And, you know, we're at this point when we just can't be passive about these things being pushed onto us. And the economic reality is an economic reality. I'm not being told, you tell you what, we're gonna focus on circularity and the circular economy or climate justice. Why not? I mean, that's what the problem is here. It's not the articulation of that. The problem is the non-articulation of that. That this is in some way some sort of pragmatic goal. You know, nice idea, but you can't have it. And the media is not doing a
Lucy,
good enough job. Sorry.
I'm gonna cut you because we've got lots of questions to get to. We're not going to be able to get through all of them. Ros, this is one that really should be that I'm directing at you, from Dominic Dyer, the director of the Badger Trust. Should we copy Germany in giving workers the legal right to work from home if their work allows them to do so? Could this massively reduce commuting, traffic congestion, air pollution, and allow our cities to be better opened up to cyclists and walkers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I actually want to answer Lucy's point, the reason air pollution wasn't included. And I would say that's because during lockdown, the government have voted against adopting WHO targets on a particular matter that might have something to do with it, and also to employers who are forcing people to literally come back to work when they don't need to. We have all realised that during the pandemic, a lot of people managed to work from home, which was quite successful, really. And there are a number of people that don't need to go back to work. And we have this obsession of everyone going into the office, in quotes, working 9 to 5. And we do need to change the way we actually do things. If we go back to how things used to be, the virus isn't going to stay down. I think we are talking as if the pandemic it's over. Far from it. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Great.
I'm going to take a question from Olivia Knight, the chair of Sharing Economy UK. She's asked, she said that governments and businesses have been heavy lobbyists for pushing back against green legislation. Sian, I know we've particularly seen it in the plastic space with big oil over the last 12 weeks, and them taking opportunistic knocks in the US and in Europe to push back on on banning plastic bags and stuff. The argument, Olivia says, that they often use is the freedom to choose, but of course none of us choose to live on a planet that is dead and barren and all those things. So she's saying, should governments be stronger in banning things? Should we? No, what we've seen over the last 10 weeks is that when the government says everyone stay at home, largely people have actually done it. So should we use this example to push back on in the environmental space and rather than putting the choice on the consumer, actually put legislation and bans in place? Does anyone want to take that question? Juliet?
Yeah, I was just going to, I just do a quick answer to that because I'm sure it's a very contentious issue, this. All I can say is that, for example, when seatbelts were bought, you had to wear them and everybody said nobody would comply. And when smoking was outlawed in public places, everybody said that was terrible. And of course, people complied very quickly and could see the benefits of that. And the change was very rapid. And I do think that, yeah, I think meat should be outlawed. I think it's absolutely crucial in terms of the Earth's recovery that it becomes a central issue and feeds, excuse the pun, into many of the others that everybody's talking about. And I also think, just very, very quickly, Viva really agrees with Extinction Rebellion's call for citizens' assemblies, because I looked at some examples around the world where citizens' assemblies have been remarkably positive and empower scientists, the public, all to come together and make decisions for their nation that politicians simply don't feel that they're able to do. But then once those decisions have been made in terms of, for example, let's talk about diet, or in terms of perhaps banning certain uses of plastic, for example, once the Citizens' Assembly make that decision, the politicians feel able to implement that because the Citizens' Assembly said it was the right thing to do. So I do agree that that's a way forward that we could implement very quickly.
Great. I'm going to take perhaps one more question, or two, maybe, if I can squeeze them in. Sian Henley, lecturer in marine. Sorry, it's jumped. Lecturer in marine science at the University of Edinburgh, says that, and this is maybe one for Sian really, in your look at plastic. COVID has shown us this kind of link between planetary disasters and how it can affect us. I think for many years we kind of thought that we were above nature, and suddenly it's brought us into sharp relief that this tiny organism that we can't even see has completely changed our lives. How can we really keep that link in place when we come out of this, and really push home that this isn't just some one-off thing, that actually we are completely integral with nature, and if we keep messing with nature in the way that we have been, and thinking that we're above it, we face disaster.
I just want to quickly totally agree with Juliet about things like citizens' assemblies, because I think you know, having actually attended one of the citizens' assembly by Frans Timmermans over in Utrecht, and he's the guy who, you know, authored the plastic strategy and the ban on single-use plastic in Europe, and to see the power of bringing people together and having access to proper science within those assemblies, I think that's how you can make change happen, and that is how you empower the public. And that's exactly how we should be thinking right now. Is we're coming out of, well, as we're not quite coming out of it, but the one thing that we've all realized is that politicians are very happy to stand there and say, I'm listening to the scientists. We're doing this because we're listening to the science. And the one thing that we are rarely doing is taking that approach and using exactly the same in the fight against plastic pollution, or many of the other environmental issues that have been discussed today. So we need to revert to the science, listen to the science, particularly with plastic. One of the things that we're involved in is the Plastic Health Coalition, which is this first union, this coming together of the environmental toxicologists, talking a lot about the amount of plastic within our air that we're breathing in, doctors and scientists to irrefutably prove the impact of plastic toxicity on human health. And when you look at what are the levers of change, I think we care about our own health. Look at what we have done because of this tiny little protein, putting half the world in lockdown. And if we can listen to the science on many of these other issues, I think that's when governments will feel empowered that they can stand behind the scientists, because they're never going to stand in front.
Great. That brings us exactly to 12 o'clock. I'm not going to let this run over, because I know that lots of our participants and panelists have got back-to-back meetings, and I know you might have a 12 o'clock right now. Can I just say a huge thank you to all of you. There's been some brilliant questions from the audience as well. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, and I've been seeing those great points that are being made in those chats as well. We will get back in contact with participants. This has been recorded, and we'll let you know how you can learn more about future webinar events that we do. Thank you very much indeed to all of you.
Thank you.